Hello, 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 hello. Thanks for coming, anybody who's turned up today. Today, we are going to do a Let's Build an API version of Laravel. This is something that I've been toying with for quite some time now, and I just got an email from YouTube telling me I was live. Perfect, thank you, YouTube, as usual. So before I begin, here is the YouTube link for afterwards. You probably, if you're already watching it, you don't need it. But here is a GitHub link. I will pop that in the chat just now. Hey, thanks for coming. Just share that on the screen. So just Steve King /LAPI, pronounced Lappy, a little bit like happy without the H. So there is a GitHub repo pre-set up, which I will be pushing all the code to towards the end. So that is okay. Hope you find it useful. So this is going to be an interesting one. I've done a lot of looking into this. You know, there's key differences between the Laravel framework and how Lumen was created with the Lumen framework, and how they pull in the different Illuminate components. So it's going to be a bit of an experiment, to be honest. I'm not 100% sure if this is going to work, if I'm completely honest. But I'm going to give it a go. So that is the important thing. We do have a raffle to do shortly, so we've still got about 6 minutes left. But I don't know if anybody who saw it on Twitter, I'm just going to grab the link to share it within here. No, that button. Yeah, copy a link to the tweet. I'm going to drop the tweet in the chat now. Not that one. My one. Ignore that last one. Can I remove it? No, I can't. Never mind. This tweet. I'll go one even better, and I will just bring Twitter over. This one. So, Erica Heidi has created a really cool little tool with mini CLI called Rafflebird. And basically what it does is it will allow you to do raffle giveaways. So to celebrate, I'm going to give a PHP Storm license away today in the next 12 minutes. All you got to do is come over and like this specific tweet. I've dropped a link in there in the chat for you. If you're watching this after it's been recorded, then unfortunately you're a little bit late, unfortunately. So not bad. Ignore this first part. I'm using dark mode a lot of the time unless I'm writing code. I use dark mode for most things. So we're going to come back to that in about 10 minutes, and we're going to have a look at just getting all of that sorted. We're going to run the little raffle. So here's the tweet. And obviously use Notion as I usually do for planning. Here's a little command I need to run. And here is the bash alias that I have set up. So it's a nice little bash alias, which is a function. And what it'll do, it'll just cd to the right directory and run the command, passing through whatever argument I pass in to there. So it makes it nice and easy for me to do them. But we'll come back to that. Onto the stream. So a lot of people have used Lumen, and I've used Lumen before quite extensively. I liked it and I didn't like it at the same time. It was very good. It was very small. It was very fast, but it felt clumsy. It felt like it was kind of, oh, we need a micro framework. Let's throw something together and we'll just update the components within it. There's with the Laravel framework itself, with the Laravel beast monolith that it is, there's a lot of well thought out aspects and concepts within there, and I don't think there's many considerations for how APIs are designed when Lumen was put together. So I want to have a look at what we can do with that. How can we take what could have made Lumen good and what makes Laravel great, and find somewhere in between which makes a great API. And we kind of want to embrace a few more PSRs because, when you're building really small systems, you're more than likely going to be building quite a lot of them. So you want to follow some sort of standard recommendations. And you're probably going to want to use PSR 7 for your HTTP messaging, for the request and response. You've probably got a PSR 11 container in there. So yeah, getting packages for Lumen was horrible. I agree. Most of the problem with packages and Lumen, I think, is middleware and service providers, I think, from what I've looked at. But we're going to kind of circle back around to what the differences are and how we'd like to do it. I think it's a child. Yeah, the child's okay. We've got a very grumpy 5-month-old who's just had their first tooth, and the wife is currently juggling a child. Right, you can pick that up on the microphone. I'll have to bear that in mind for next time I have a meeting. Yeah, so where were we? Yeah, so we're going to take Laravel, not Lumen. We're going to take the Laravel framework, and we're going to see how that was put together and just leave out the parts we don't want. So we're going to look at the Laravel/Laravel repository, and we're going to look at the Laravel framework repository, and we're going to start to kind of piece things together as we go. So we're going to focus on the application, the container, the router, dispatcher. So I'm going to walk through these in a second. Then the middleware, handlers, and root loading. So the application, we might need. I'm gonna change my wording here. We might need to build a custom application class, which is designed to bootstrap the application. Blah 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 blah. So we could just pull in Laravel, create our own stuff, and do it that way, and then just refactor later on. And that might be something I'd look to do, especially for during streams. I want to kind of make sure that I'm not flipping from this repository to that one, having to push and sync and start to juggle. It's going to get messy. So we're probably going to go for we can just do a composer create project Laravel, and then just start creating our own classes to override or adjust some of what Laravel was providing so that we can start trim things back, start to lessen that blueprint and start to see what we can do. Oh, she went back in bed. Oh, yeah, she usually likes her bed. So the container. So if you look at the Illuminate container, it does implement it doesn't directly implement the container interface for PSR 11. It implements their own container interface, which extends the PSR 11 interface. But having looked through it, I couldn't see any of the PSR 11 methods stubbed out or anything, so I'm not really sure what's going on there, but we'll dig into that as well. Probably minimal changes required, but if we're completely honest, the Laravel container is fantastic. You can bind singletons, you can make aliases, you can do so much stuff, and it's for a container. There's not too much to it. It's just good. Next, the router. So Laravel by default uses Symfony's router. It uses the HTTP foundation for its routing, I believe, and Lumen used FastRoute. And I know I can make FastRoute PSR 15 compliant, which is one of the eventual aims, but Symfony, I'm not sure. I'd assume you can make Symfony routing PSR compliant in some way. So we might have a look at that and see what we can do. But we might just have to create a bridge somewhere or do something with some custom code. The dispatcher, so we need a PSR 15 compliant request dispatcher and handler. So that's something like Laminus, HTTP server and runner, or Mezio, or they're the main ones I can think of, to be honest. Basically, there's like a middleware pipeline, and you're dispatching, calling through a chain on that pipeline. You just kind of say, okay, call and pass through the next one and keep passing through until you get to the end, and then that will return a response. And it's either going to process it or it's going to handle it. So the process will be the middleware. We want to process this incoming request, pass it along, and then the HTTP handler, the controller, will handle that itself. So that's middleware. We will create our own version of middleware which implements middleware interface. We might just update the stub, perhaps, or we'll have to have a look at how middleware's loading into Laravel, but we'll come back round to that when we get there. You know, today I'm assuming we're going to mainly be doing lots of poking and prodding and playing. Handlers, our controller will be renamed to handlers. So we won't have controllers anymore, we'll have HTTP handlers, and they'll implement the request handler interface, and that will ensure some PSR 15 compliance. We need to pull in all the PSRs for this, so lots to do. And obviously root loading. We need to look at how we're going to approach root loading. So if we look at the default Laravel, for example, so if I just open this as a page so we can see it. So I was writing bash in here last, so let's go to PHP. If we look at Laravel, you know, we've got a root facade and we can perform a method, we can pass in a closure, and we can do something. At that point, we're not doing much. In Lumen, we were able to say apt-get this, and then, but you're basically passing in something here that could either be resolved, or it could be called, or it could be executed. That's the idea there. It's, you know, that will just get called, and the response will just, the result of that will just get passed into a response. If it's a callable class, there an invocable class will just invoke it and do much of the same. And you know, it's all doing somewhat the same. Now, if we look at PSR 15, if we look at any PSR 15 framework, so let's look at Chubby PHP. This is probably the most PSR compliant framework I've ever met. So what this one is great. This would be so much better if we could load roots nicer and make this look nicer, because from a developer experience, I look at this and I'm just thinking that is going to be a pain as soon as I get more than 30 roots in there, you know, having to stick them all in there. And suddenly this root matcher middleware, which is loading in the new root matcher, which is loading in some new roots, which is creating some roots and passing in the response, it gets messy so quickly. I just hate to have to maintain that. We need to think of how we can do it. So I did have one solution. That's a Laravel framework. Are we talking about my kids on stream? Shall I just get the kids on stream instead? Would that be easier? Or shall we get the wife? Get the wife to bring the kids on stream. She's cool. Right. So what we did before was we just started to build up an array of that's our route, because yeah, we can collapse that quite easily. And if we, it's quite obvious where things are, we can start another one here. And these we can just add in another one, and it was quite nice and easy how I could do that. And I think that works really well. But I don't know if this is a method that Laravel developers would get on with as well. My idea for my framework is that it's going to be open API driven, but that might not be the best thing for a Laravel templated API. You still need to keep some of that feeling that you're within Laravel and have an easy option to switch back without having to do too much work. So no, wife isn't coming into my stream. Yeah. Apparently they can hear the child through the microphone, so it must be picking up a lot. I better try not to fart on stream. So, before I get too deep into this now, it's just gone 8 o'clock. And I can now, Rian just, he commented on the tweet itself, so we can now just do a tweet. So, here is a tweet. 1945-ish. Well, it's 8 o'clock. I thought I may as well give people a chance as soon as I start the stream. So this is all I need to run here. So if I open up my terminal and come back, terminal. Where'd you go? Oh, other screen. Wrong screen. It ran away. Right, so let's zoom in to a significant amount. And this is a command I need to run. So that is who won. This person. So what it does is it will 21 people are participating because 21 people have commented, apparently, according to this. And here's all the people that did comment. If you didn't win, I apologize. I do these quite often, so keep your eye out. And we have a winner. So I am going to screenshot that. We're just going to grab that. Let's make sure you keep all of that in there so it nice and square. Capture, and I'll stick that up on Twitter later and we'll let them know. So now that's been done, we can get back to this. So onto the stream or onto some code. So let's take a step through some of this. So here is the Laravel repository. What we got our composer.json here. And all we're pulling in is Laravel itself, Tinker, Guzzle, Laravel cores, and a proxy. And then for development, we're pulling in all of these cool little things here. Then we're pretty much loading everything with an app. Yeah, we definitely need a Fox PHP t-shirt, definitely. I'm wearing my one of my GitHub ones today, but we definitely need a Fox PHP. And if we could get it to look anything like this little 3D printed Eevee that I've got, that would be even cooler. And that's my Laravel logo 3D print, which is kind of really funky. But less about my cool things I've got hanging about on my desk. Otherwise, we'll start to get elephants popping up. So what I think we need to do is let's walk through how Laravel starts working. So our request comes into our web server and we load it through to index.php. That bit most people know if you've set it up. And what we do is did I hear elephants? Yes, I've got elephants galore. I've got 8 there. I've got 2 gophers, a shark, 1 hiding on my desk because he hasn't got a home yet. I've got a GitHub Octocat over there on top of my 3D printer. They're everywhere. And I've got the Infinity one coming at some point, thanks to my wife. But anyway, enough about me and my elephant obsession. So when this file loads, these are just 2 of the main classes that are needed. So we define a Laravel start, which is a micro time, just so that we can it tracks the timing in the background, basically. So if you ever do a new micro time and minus Laravel start from it, then you'll see how long it's taken you to get to that point. It's a cool little way to see if you're taking a bit too long to do things. So then we do this interesting little if we've got the maintenance.php script in our storage path for the framework, then we just pull that in, and that is most likely gonna die. It's gonna die and say, sorry, don't go any further. We are under maintenance. Then we register the autoloader, which is just a composer thing, which is fine. We then go on to run the application. So what we do is we require in the Bootstrap app. Then we tell our application to make a kernel, which is, if we come up here, the HTTP kernel. And because that is bound inside here, we don't get the interface, we get the one that we actually want. But before we'll go through this. There's a few little things here. So for a response, we do a tap, which is kind of like a higher order function, I suppose. So what tap, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've never used tap, if I'm completely honest. I've read about it, never needed it. What that will do is it will execute what's within and then allow you to chain on, I believe. So the kernel will handle a request. We create a request on the fly with request capture and assign it the request variable. And then once we've grabbed that, we then send that request, and that gives us a response which we pass through to the kernel and call terminate. And terminate is just, okay, we've got nothing else we need to do. Here's a request, here's a response. Dispatch it and display it as it needs to be displayed. And that is where all of the magic will tie in. So if we look at this Bootstrap app itself, I don't know if we can click through. Yeah, we can. Perfect. So the first thing we get is this Illuminate Foundation application. This is Laravel itself. This is the main Laravel application, which is basically just a wrapper around the container with other things set up. And if we haven't got an app-based path configured in our environment, then we just pass through the directory name for here, I believe. That's what it looks like it's trying to do. And then we start binding the important interfaces. So we create a singleton for the Illuminate HTTP kernel, and we give it the local kernel that we've got under the HTTP directory. Actually, the dispatch is done on the sent method, and the terminate is for the task that may be registered. Cheers, Nuno. And he turned up and he taught me how to do it. So, as Nuno just said, so the dispatch is done on the send method. So basically, I'm assuming this kernel handle is building up the request. You're capturing the incoming request, and you're kind of, best way to explain it, it's like preparing the cake and then the sending is cooking it, right? So you're you're going to incoming request, you're going to push that through however you're matching your routes, and then you will send that request using the kernel, and that gives you the response. And then the terminate, as Nuno says here, is for tasks that may be registered by the user for cleanup. So that's like after middleware and all of that sort of stuff, I assume. Cool. Great. It's always good to have someone to explain it as you go through. I've never looked at this side of Laravel, if I'm completely honest. So it's definitely interesting. I mean, if we look at, I should probably install things. That is installed, so I should now be able to, it's indexing, so we'll come back to that part. So here we are, because the application extends the container, it acts like a container at the same time. So we can create a singleton, we can create we can bind new dependencies into the container to pull out as and when we need to. So here we're just saying, okay, so when we want to bind our HTTP kernel to this contract. So anywhere where we're requesting this contract, give our local version of this HTTP kernel. Hey, Daniel. And again, the same thing for the console. So the way Laravel works here is it uses, I believe it's the microkernel. It's a microkernel pattern or something like that. Not something that I've used much or know too much about, but I believe the idea is that you get two different. It's like the adapters and ports, I believe. So it's just two different mechanisms to achieve the same goal, but definitely something that someone else would have to explain there. And then for the exception handler interface or contract, as Laravel calls them, we are going to run binding this one. So we're setting up our application at this stage. We go, okay, so if anything's coming from HTTP, we want to pass this to it. If anything's coming through our CLI or SAPI is PHP SAPI for the CLI and PHP, then this is what will deal with it. And then obviously if an exception happens at any time, this is the class that's going to handle that. And then we literally just return the app, which takes us back to here for us to allow us to make that kernel, which we literally just set up. So nice and clean. Is at most, if you condensed it instead of making it look pretty, it'll be about 25 lines of code and away it's gone. Everything else is inner wirings on the insides and config and setup. So that is how that part works. So what we want to look at here is, how does this application work? How does it all coming together, right? So I'm at the Laravel framework now, so I'm just going to install all my composer dependencies here also. I feel like I'm going to have a lot of pressure now. I know Nuno's watching because he works for Laravel, and here I am playing with it and trying to make it better. Sorry. It's not that it's not good. It's just I want to build something opinionated because I'm opinionated as it is. So if we look in the framework source, we've got this Illuminate namespace here. And then all of these are the components that make up what we know as Laravel. Anything to do with a database, anything to do with PDO or migrations, it is all within here. And anything that is like core Laravel and not, I suppose, classed as a component of Laravel is in Foundation. And that is where we'll find the application which we were talking about earlier. So if we just zoom in a little bit here so you can read it nicely, what we've got is Illuminate Foundation application, which extends our container. And here is Laravel's container. It is, let me just check that. It is, okay, 1,400 lines long, but it's got lots of comments to guide you through. But it's not that big. It's relatively contained. It's not calling. I've seen some containers like PHPDI, which is sprawled across maybe 15 to 20 different classes. And while those classes may only be, at most 50 to 60 lines long, they're still 50 to 60, which is kind of it's what Laravel's given us here. It's like the pre-built version of what we need and what we see in other aspects. If we go look at the Laminas Service Manager and try and figure out how that works, you're jumping from class to class to class because it's a little bit like a set of Meccano or a Lego set that you need to put together. Whereas this is what it is. It does a good job. It's a fast container, and it works. It resolves your dependencies, and it does zero config dependency injection, so it doesn't need to know about the class. It doesn't have to have been told it's about this class. It doesn't need to do anything other than, great, you want to resolve this class, let me do that for you, and away it'll go. It'll resolve the dependencies, it'll use reflection, it will check the constructor arguments, it'll start to pull all of this in, and in the end it will just give you this instance, this nice, easy to use instance, and you don't have to worry about newing anything up, pulling in class after class after class. So it implements array access, which is an internal PHP function. And that also implements a container contract. And this is here, which extends the container interface, which is where we find PSR. So this should have a get and a has. So we do not have a get method. So I don't know how, maybe Nuno could actually answer that one. How we extend, we're extending the interface. Does that mean that we are PSR compliant because we're extending the interface still, even though we don't have all of the methods? We don't have the get, we don't have the has. Yeah, we've got the get event. Oh, okay, I see. So the interface is extending, so it doesn't actually need to kind of, yeah. For some reason, I was thinking interfaces needed to kind of declare it again. I've never really done many interfaces, extending interfaces, but I've never built a framework, so there we go. Although I'll get there. So we now know we can go to our Notion here. So we can say no changes required here, which is great news because it is PSR 11 compliant, which is what we wanted. Yeah, like today's I've been writing PHP for 10 years or more, and using Laravel for 6 to 7 of those years. Before that, I was heavy with Slim PHP and Zend, and I've only just learned that you can extend. I knew you could extend interfaces, but I didn't know that. I kind of assumed, because an interface is more like a contract definition, I thought you had to almost replicate it, but I suppose thinking back, you definitely didn't. So there's that. So we've got the container. Here's our application. This implements the application contract. We implement caches configuration, caches routes, and the HTTP kernel interface. So this one is going to be one of our interesting ones. So this is coming from Symfony itself, Symfony HTTP kernel. And this is how we handle a request. Now, this is almost PSR 15 compliant. That would need to be a server request. A server request interface, and it would need to return a response interface. So I don't believe these implement them, so it isn't compliant, unfortunately. But that would have just made life easier, right? So we'll have to look at how we're going to handle the routing. I think it's mainly going to be routing and dispatching that we're going to play with here. But we've got a nice constant version to keep us in check as we go through, passing through the base path, which we saw earlier. Which, has the application been bootstrapped before? Yes or no? I assume that's something to do with is that Octane, or is that something else for some other reason? Unless you've got other checks going through. Never mind. Booting callbacks. You can register in booting callbacks. Service providers for loaded provided. Any that have been deferred. All your kind of your path helpers going in there, where your environment file name, is it running in the console, applications namespace, which I believe you can't even set anymore, so that might be old legacy stuff that can get removed. Absolute cache prefixes. So if we went back and had a look here in our index.php, what we see here is, our Bootstrap app, not our index. We see we're creating a new application and we're passing in this base path or a directory name. So this is where we are. We are in this part of the application. We're passing in this base path. It could be null. That's only showing errors, by the way, because I've got a strict version of PHP running and set up on PHP Storm. It is not Laravel. It is my setup. So if we've got a base path, then we want to set the base path. It's that simple. And obviously this set base path is just going to do its magic for setting paths in the container, and our trim, just remove the white space, and set a property and then bind stuff in the container. So this is where we're setting an instance of string for path, this path and this base path. So that's where we get a lot of the path helpers coming from. So let's go back up to here, and then we're registering the base bindings. So these base bindings are things like setting the instance ourselves. If you look at the Illuminate container, if you watch my earlier stream where we had a look at the one that Jess Archer built, it's static. It's a static singleton, so it can only be created once. So at some point you've got to set that the instance is us while you're creating it. And then obviously set an instance of app for this. The container, we are the container. And then a mix class, which is, I don't even know what mix does. I've not used it or looked at it, unless that is the Laravel mix stuff. Yeah, that's hot reloading and Laravel mix magic, which is awesome. And then the singleton package manifest, we're going to return a new package manifest, which does, I don't even know what the package manifest does. I've not used it before. I'm assuming this is part of the vendor services loading stuff. Vendor path manifest file. Yeah, this is how we're pulling in. But this is why we don't have to register service providers from third-party packages, I assume. Because that's just registering our basic bindings at that point. Let's go back to here, and then this next part. This is where most of the magic, in my eyes, is coming from, is in these three functions there. In those three function calls, we are setting up any other dependencies that have been set up and auto-configuring them. We are registering any base service providers. We're going, okay, so all the service providers that we've now got and we now know about, let's either boot them or register them into the container so that they can be called or used as and when they need to. And then we're going to register any core container aliases, which I believe are the facades and stuff. So this one is crazy. So we're going to register the event service provider, the log service provider, and the routing service provider. Now, those two, we know we're going to want to keep the same. I don't want to mess with the events or the way that things are logged because they work. I need to dig into the routing service provider. And this is where I might need to look at how we're going to do this. So we're registering the router. We're generating the URL generator. Then we're registering the redirector, register PSR request and PSR response. Now they are there, but I believe they only work if we've pulled in the Symfony bridge, but we'll have a look at that. And then we've got the response factory and the controller dispatcher. So this is the main thing we need to look at when it comes to anything custom that we're going to want to do. Most of Laravel, what we want for it is good. It is what we want and what we need. And it's why we're doing this, right? We're doing this stream because we like Laravel. And we just want to find a way to do something slightly different, maybe slightly more opinionated for APIs. You know, every time I start a new API project, I spend at least 2 days, maybe 3 days, you know, resetting up Laravel to how I need it for an API. And it's a lot of wasted time. So register PSR request. So this is where we're registering a binding for the PSR7 request implementation. So get the application and we are going to bind the server request interface, which is a PSR interface. And that is going to be a closure that comes back. So if the class exists, PSR17 factory, and the class exists for the HTTP factory, we're going to create a new factory, and then we're going to just create a request. Done. Passing in everything that we actually need to do. So that is an undefined class currently. Again, an undefined class. That, I believe, all comes from the Symfony bridge. So Symfony have got an extra package, which when installed, it allows their routing component to be a PSR7 compliant, I believe. So that's something we need to look at. Down here. So if we can't do that, if we can't register while we're binding, we're just going to throw a quick binding resolution exception saying that, okay, we can't resolve this PSR request. You need to install the Symfony PSR bridge and Niom's PSR7 package. I don't know if any PHP 7 package, PSR 7 package would work. I don't think it's as abstract as that, but I usually go for Niom's anyway, so it's fine. Then if we have a look again with the response, if it exists, please return it. Otherwise, throw an exception saying, why haven't you installed it yet? Then registering response factory, which is standard across Laravel, and then the controller dispatcher. So controller dispatcher, when we want to dispatch a new controller, we are going to return this new class, which is here. So that takes in the container, and when we're dispatching, we want to resolve class methods with dependencies. If a method exists, call action. Do that. Otherwise, basically a little bit of magic based on how we've set things up. It's just going to take everything we've configured and set it up. So I won't look too much into this because I'm not actually, I'll look through this when it's time for us to start looking at this. But right now, we aren't going to be using a lot of the routing stuff for Laravel. We're probably going to be a lot closer to how Lumen did it. So there might be something that we could do by, merging the two together in some Frankenstein way, just to see if we can get a proof of concept. If we scroll back through, we've got lots of stuff going on in Laravel, and most of this is exactly what we want it to be. There's at most a handful of methods which we're going to override within here. So this is, I did start doing some stuff. I did start pulling in the container. I did start doing stuff, but I actually don't think I need it. So, yeah, I think I might have been too quick to judge what I thought was going to work. So, I put my hands up and say, I think I might have been wrong. And we will start here. So, we're just going to remove everything within this directory quickly. Yep, remove it all. And wrong one. RF. Okay. Cool. So now this is where we just need to install some Laravel, basically. So we're just going to, we could go like the Laravel installer route, but we don't want to do that because we don't really want to install Laravel. We just want to get a copy of Laravel so we can play with it. So we're just going to do the composer create project. We don't want to worry about Jetstream or anything like that. We just want to get Laravel/Laravel, start working with it. I've got a copy over here, but I don't want to mess with that. I need something to reference back to later on. So we're going to create a new project from Laravel, and we're going to create that dot here. So let's wait for that to install. It shouldn't take long because I am hardwired to the internet. So this, if I go to we've got Laravel. It is working. So that is us set up. We're not a Git repository yet. So that's our first step. Let's set this up as a Git repository. Get in it. Why was I trying to add one of those days? Right, so now we'll just add everything. We don't, everything so far is Laravel. So now let's commit and say default Laravel installed. Right, that is us there. So I'm going to be pushing as we go with this one. So if anyone wants to pull and PR or pull and say that I'm doing everything completely wrong, feel free. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to work. So I'm just giving it a go. Right, that code, it's all going to be up there now. Perfect. So that is now Laravel. In theory, we could have just used Laravel as a template, which probably would have been easier to keep up to date, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. This is an experiment to see if we can do it. So the first thing I want to do is come over to my composer.json, and we want to auto-load some new stuff. So I'm going to add another record in here, and we're going to just make a new namespace for Lappy. We're just going to stick everything in source. And we can create that directory for us. Thank you very much. And because it's PHP Storm, I can just run update up there. It will do its business down here, and away we go. So as we saw earlier, a lot of things work as we want them to here. So all we need is not an index. Index works fine, although we'd have to have a look at how this is being set up. So if we just set our application into maintenance mode, we can have a look at that one. I have got an alias. I keep forgetting I've got an alias. How do you set your site down? I haven't done that I can't even remember last time I had to do that, to be honest. Down, I believe, is it? Yeah, down. It's now in maintenance mode. So I come and have a look at this. Down. If file exists, current directory down. Get the content, do some stuff. Header response. Exit. Just dump out the template basically. So storage framework down. Ah, okay. That's kind of cool. Kind of cool how that works. And then I'm going to assume if I now just say like a up, I'll put PHP artisan up. It just deletes it. That's a really neat little way to do that. Sorry, I'm getting distracted again. So within source here, we are going to create a new PHP class, and we're just going to call this application. And we'll stick in the namespace Flappy, and we'll extend it manually. So as usual, anything that I do always declare strict types. That's just me. I'm going to focus on the screen instead of myself so you can see the code clearer for this part. So here's our application. And we've already got the Laravel application if we look in Bootstrap app. So what we want to do is we just want to replace this Illuminate Foundation application. So what we'll do, we'll come over to here and we'll just manually set this, give this an alias. We'll say as Laravel application. We're extending our Laravel application. So now if we come back to app, if we just do this and do that, will this still load? Oh, look, we've created our own already. We've got a good place to start. Let's make sure our autoloader is working fine. Make sure that our stuff is all loaded. Yeah, that is working perfectly. And because we're only going to be extending certain parts of the application itself, you know, all of the other stuff already works. So packages will work. Octane, in theory, should still work. So we can start building this. So let's have a look at this. Let's pull it open side by side and let's start going through it. So let's override the version because actually, no, we won't. We won't. We want the version. We don't need any of this to change. We don't need any of this stuff to change. Environment configs, constructing, register base service providers. This might need to be updated. So if I come to here and we do this, pull all of that in and import that one. Eliminate events. Let's make sure that we pull in the correct ones. Eliminate events, yep. So these are all going to be the Illuminate ones, and not the support ones. So in theory, if we do this, again, still nothing should change. Still, absolutely nothing is changing. Perfect, that's exactly how we wanted that to work. So let's take a second and let's comment that one out. We now fail. Perfect. Router doesn't exist. So we know where we need to start extending from there. So if we come back to our app here, this is what we need to replace eventually, but we need to look into how the kernel works. We've got a handle, which is a request. We might need to create our own kernel interface. Terminate, get application. That bit should be easy enough. Most of it should be easy enough. Most of it should be. But we still have a long way to go with understanding how we're going to make Laravel PSR compliant. So our first step was obviously will have to be PSR 7. So we need to get PSR 7 set up. So first thing, we've got a composer install to do. Put that in there. That is a message bridge setup. And now PSR 7 from now on is also set up. So if we now come back to here, I am expecting no difference. So retrieving input data, we can do all input name. So if you return a PSR 7 response instance from a router or controller, it will automatically be converted back to a Laravel response instance and be displayed by the framework. Okay, this is why we might have to look at the routing, because we want it to be PSR compliant. We may run into issues there. So what we need to look at is Mezio or Laminas HTTP handler and runner. So if you look at their README, and if we can zoom in at all, no. Okay, we should just open it up on the website. HTTP handler and runner. Docs. So idea of this package is to execute a PSR 15 request handler interface instances and emit the responses that they generate. The long and the short of it, this is pretty much what we need to replace that Symfony kernel stuff with. We need to create our own kind of PSR 15 HTTP kernel. So let's go back to Notion so we can start to plan parts of this. So application, yeah, we've done that. We have created our own custom application because we want to override parts of it. The container, well, we don't need to do anything. There's the core components. So let's create another list, inline list, and we're going to say call these custom components. And the first custom component we definitely know we're going to need is going to be the HTTP kernel. So we will need to create a custom PSR 15 HTTP kernel, which we can use within Laravel. We don't need to create an interface, but we will do. Ooh, the wife is asking what shops are open. That is a good question. I think the wife is getting snackish, and I don't blame her. I'm getting hungry myself. So, so we're going to create a custom PSR 15 HTTP kernel, which we will use within Laravel. We will make an interface also. I like binding to interfaces when it comes to containers, where possible. So we know we're going to need to make a HTTP kernel. Let me delete some of this other stuff. Gets auto-generated. So we know we need that kernel. If we have a look at the code for the handler and runner quickly, see how Laminas handles this. So here it is. We have got, in effect, a HTTP kernel, which has got an emitter and a handler. We've got an error response generator being passed in, a server request factory, which is, I believe, PSR 17. And then the constructor for this one, we're passing in the PSR 15 request handler. We're passing in an emitter. So that'll be a way to return that response, which is, for most PHP applications, just echoing it out really. And then we're passing in this callable PSR 17 request factory. And then we're also passing in some server request error response generator. So what we do is we set the handler, set the emitter, we build up our server request factory, and then a server error response generator will be the callable, which takes in a throwable as an argument. It takes in the generator, it also pulls in the generator that's passed in, and then it just returns the callable passing in the exception. So running it. So you'll try and get the request. So this server request factory, it'll try and get that request. If anything fails, we're going to emit a marshal to the server request exception. So basically, we're going to send that exception to this, which will then handle that exception itself. We're going to build that response by saying, okay, so the handler, let's just handle it. That's the whole point of PSR 15 is your middleware is processed and your handlers are handles, and then the emitter is emitting the response. This bit we're not worried about right now. So that's it. That is a very simplistic way to look at it, to be honest. I'm probably not giving it anywhere near as much justice. So let's have a look at how Laminas does it. So if we come over to Laminas, for example, here's, Mezio, we're looking at Laminas. So Mezio is made by the same group of people, but this is more of a micro framework, whereas Laminas is Zend components. So Mezio itself implements the middleware interface, and it also implements the request handler interface. In fact, it's very similar to how I started with Fox PHP. We've got a middleware interface. I'm pulling in Mezio components. I'm pulling in Laminas. So I could replace these eventually with a component of my own, and I'll probably end up using that within Lappy. But I've got my own middleware pipe and middleware factory. I've got my own config loader and config repository, my own stuff going on there. But basically, the way that this works is we boot our application. I'll walk you through the one I've built because I can explain that the best. So we make our application and we run our application. That is literally all we need to do. So when we're making our application, we're passing through our base path. Then we create a new middleware pipeline. And then, because it's a static function, it's got to return something. And because it is a final class, you don't want to return static. You can just return application. So we create a new application, and we're passing through all the things we need. We're passing through our base pass. We're passing through the middleware factory and the pipeline, the fast route router, and the request handler and runner, which is, at the minute, I'm just dumping out stuff there because I'm looking at how I can handle errors. But eventually, I'm hoping I can replace this, and then I can replace that. And then the routes is a new route collector with the app router, which we just bound up here. And then we're loading in our default middleware. We're loading in our routes and we're loading our config, and we return our app. And then when we run, we're just saying run a run. And our runner is a request handler runner, which is going to just handle everything for us, because this is implements a request handler interface, and we've got our middleware pipeline already. It's just piping things through our middleware pipeline really fast, really easy, chaining things on, and it'll call the current one and preload the next one, get the response, call the next one while preloading the next one and passing that through as an argument. So it's kind of sending to, loading to, sending one, load the next one, send the other one. It's just kind of following that chain through until it needs to return a response at the end. The way that I've done that in mine is that if I hit a handler, I return. That simple. If I'm that way, I don't have after middleware currently. It might be a nicer way for me to do that later, but I'll have to play. But the idea is that you're passing your requests through this layer of the application onion. You're passing it from the outside to the inside. You handle your business logic, then you come back out, and that's when you get your response. So that's what we're trying to do here with Lappy. And this is why our routing service provider, we are going to have to create our own one. So that's a very roundabout way to explain why we needed to create one, wasn't it? So new routing, routing. So here's routing in there, and we're going to create our own routing service provider. Hey, Benjamin. Yeah, a little bit late. Not to worry. It's going well. It is going well. I've walked through what builds up Laravel, how things are chained together, and what parts we're going to focus on basically for creating our own version. Not our own version of Laravel, but our own kind of template of Laravel. So if I just grab this routing service provider, I know I need to extend the service provider, which is an abstract class there. So I know I will also need to do the same. That's going to extend the service provider. So this can now switch to my custom one, because we're at this stage, we're in my application. We're not in Laravel's. It doesn't matter too much what we change here. So that means I can start doing things my way. Yes. So we're going to register base service providers. We're overriding a method there while we're using extension. And then this routing service provider, we're just going to pull in a different one now. So import class, pull in mine. Way over your head. If I'm completely honest, it's over my head. I'm battling through it on stream and hoping I don't look too ridiculous doing it. So reflection class router does not exist in container. So we have our first issue. If we swap that back, it works. if we set it to our own, we are failing, which means that, let's go back so I can pull up that one. Maybe we should extend this instead. That might be a smarter move. So we're going to extend this. And we're going to name this Laravel routing service provider. And that we'll do that. And then if we come back to here, now we are all good. It means that we can start overriding methods instead of building up our own approach, which might be a nicer way to do it. Because there's very minimal stuff that we need to do with Laravel, and we want to lean on anything else updated within Laravel itself. So if event service provider, anything in the events world that's getting loaded or touched at any point to this event service provider or this log service provider, if that gets updated by the core framework, I want to receive those benefits. The only thing I want to play with here is the routing and how routing is happening. I want to swap the router. I want to use PSR 7. I want to use PSR 15. So I'm being extremely specific and overriding methods where I need to override methods instead of pulling in the components and starting from scratch and having a bit of a painful time. So I do not need the webpack.mix. I can delete that. Let's do some cleanup as well. Yep, do that refactor. Don't need package.json because we're building an API. Thank you very much. Also means we can come to resources, CSS, and say bye-bye. Same with the JS. We'll keep the lang stuff because it could be useful for emails, and views. We'll keep the view for now because we're using it as a kind of point of reference. We'll clean up some more stuff within here later once we've got API routes loading. So I want to make sure we get a certain way down before we start deleting too much. Got to be careful with this stuff. So if we just add source application, you can say that at this stage we are overriding the Laravel application to add our own custom service provider. You can also add this custom root service provider extends Laravel's service provider, and all the rest I can just commit under a cleanup. I'm just going to push all of that. So all we're doing here is, I could have quite easily just taken the components I want and just started piecing it together and hoping for the best. But before I know it, I would have tripped over myself because Laravel is complex. There's a lot going on under the hood. It might seem simple to some people, and it might be simple to some people, but this is, there's a lot of work gone into this. And the original version, it took Taylor, 7, 8, 9 months to build, evenings, weekends, spare time. And if you think of what you could build in that time, think of how much work has gone into this. I'm not disregarding anything that's been created within Laravel because they've done a lot of great stuff. What I'm trying to do is just customize it to my specific requirements. So now we've got our own. Okay. drop that and pull that back in. Sorry, I didn't do that right, did I? So this should still load. So we just want to customize how routing is happening. We've still got to call those because we're overriding the method. That's fine. We can handle that. We're still doing everything else that the Laravel application is doing, which is why everything still works. And why if we do a PHP artisan, everything still works. Sail is still set up if we need it. We can still publish for stubs. We can vendor publish packages. Everything works. The root list and root everything still works. Even though we've already set up for PSR 7 and we've started to extend parts of it, we are going in the right direction. So this root service provider, this is what we need to focus on. So we're registering the router at this point. So let's see what we're doing here. We're creating an abstract router and we're creating a new router passing through the events and the application itself. So that, I believe, is what is using Symfony's router under the hood. Yeah, Foundation Factory, response interface. Loads of stuff. It's just so much stuff. Piecing it together, you start picking at a piece of thread, and suddenly, before you know it, everything's been pulled out. So events. This is where we're getting the dispatcher interface for the Laravel dispatcher, and the container itself, which means that we can get a new root collection, which should be fine. Up to this point, I'm pretty happy. The router itself is what we might struggle with here. Because that's using Symfony's. And I don't know if we can use Symfony routing and PSR 15. I don't know if there's anything we can do. Apparently, something can be done because someone's created like an adapter or a bridge or something. But I don't know. We may have to dig into this. Okay, so middleware implementing double pass and projects using double pass, Slim, Zend, middleman, relay, PHP middleware stuff. So double pass is this very basic concept which I've got in the Fox PHP. And if I come and what did I call it? I just called it next, I believe. So the idea of this is that when your middleware pipeline, you're piping things through, you pass through the queue, a clone of your current queue, and then you pass through like some callback handler, which is going to be your fallback. So if something cannot be handled, then or if a handler doesn't exist or anything like that, you've got a fallback handler. So if the queue is null, if we haven't got a queue passed in for any specific reason, we're just going to throw a quick runtime exception and say that we cannot invoke the pipeline more than once. At this point, the queue's been killed. We've reached the end, and we're trying to carry on. So if the queue is empty, we're going to set the queue to null, and then we're going to return the fallback handler, and we're just going to handle it. We're catching those edge cases there. Then we're going to get the middleware. We're going to get the last piece, DQ. DQ's a node from the queue. We just kind of pulling something off the queue there, and the next middleware in the chain is going to be, again, ourselves next. And then we're setting the queue to null again. Then if it is a request handler, this is where I just say, okay, so handle it. Otherwise, I start to process the middleware chain. And each time we go through, we're back where we are. We're back where we are. The handler is next. We're still going back through this, going back through next, going back through next, until we hit this request handler. And that, while we're doing this, this is our handle method. If we need this to be processed, we can process it. This will just keep passing through, and the handler will be called, and the middleware will be called as and when it's required. That is double pass. It's kind of, I believe the way Laravel does it is we pass through next, I believe, in some middleware. Redirects to, none of these work, none of these are it. Here we go, closure next. We're passing through, at this point, we are passing through the request and the next callable. And that is all we are doing with, that's all we need to worry about at that point, is that is how the double pass will work. I went slightly sidetracked there, so I do apologize. So the URL generator, I think that's going to be absolutely fine. I'm not seeing a problem with that right now, but we'll come back to it. We can drop that down. Request rebinder. I don't see a reason why we'd need to override that. The redirector. Don't see any reason why we'd need to mess with redirections. Laravel's going to hook up all of, first time seeing clone. Yeah, it's probably the first time in the last 5 or 6 years I've had to use clone. So I don't think we need to mess with the redirector at this point. Registering a PSR request. This is what we are using, this part here. And we are using the Niome stuff already, so we don't need to override any of this. And we don't need to override anything to the responses, or the response factory, I think, is going to be fine. The controller disk, this is one that we definitely know we need to override. So if we come back to here, we know we have to override this one, because our control, we need a different controller dispatcher. Basically, we don't want to be doing it this specific way when it's being dispatched. We want it to go through a middleware chain following PSR 15 instead of just dispatching this specific one and handling the middleware the way that this handles middleware, which we'll dig into once I figure that out. So implements that. It uses root dependency resolver trait, resolves class methods, method dependencies. This is, you could chase your tail for weeks going through some of how Laravel was put together, and each time you click through to a new class, you will blow your mind even further. Just the complexities that are kind of hidden away from you, making your life so easy. So we know we need to override this one. So let's just save that and make sure our application still works. Yeah, it does. Perfect. So that is most likely, and that these two are most likely the only two we actually need to worry about overriding. The router and the dispatcher, in effect. So kind of what I expected. We need to use a specific router, and we need to use a specific dispatcher. Now, when we're registering the router, this is, I believe, this is where we're forwarding all calls to. So we are binding the router into there. I don't think we need to worry too much. Yeah. New router. Great. So the router itself, obviously macroable. It is a binding registrar. It follows a registrar contract. Yeah, chase your tail so much getting through some of this. So the events dispatcher. So the events dispatcher in the router itself, that is all about, it's more about the events dispatching more than dispatching the route itself. The container is here, collecting our routes, the route collector, that's fine. The currently dispatched route instance, the requests currently being dispatched, all of the shorthand keys for middleware, all the middleware groups, the priority of the middleware, any binders for route value binding, which ideally I'd like to be able to keep, but I don't know whether I'm going to be trying my luck too much to get that to work. Globally available parameter patterns, don't need to worry about much of that. That is fine. Most of this is fine, if I'm completely honest. And if I can find a way to make this work with PSR 15, I don't even think I need to worry about replacing the router. I just need to worry about how I'm calling the routes. Fallback placeholder, fallback redirect, permanent redirect. This is how we're going to load a view. So that's where if you see something like I don't want to do anything within there. This is where if you see something like in your routes file, you can do route view quite nicely. And for static routes, that's what I do. If it's wrapped within middleware and I'm using a Livewire component already, I do that. Why set up a controller just to return a view so other things can load in the logic? Match, this is where you pass multiple in. Most of mine, I think, are going to have to be match. I think part of the way of PSR 15 working or fast route, part of it I might need to have to pass through an array of the verbs I want to accept on a route. But I'll have to dig into that more as it gets to it. Resources don't need, resource don't need, API resource don't need. So I could probably create my own here and just trim out the things I know I won't need. I won't need a few. I won't need quite a few of these things. Load routes. Load the provided routes. If the routes are an instance of closure, then run it. Otherwise, if it's a route file registrar, then we're going to register the routes. And registering those routes will pass in the routes router, this router require routes. Literally is loading that file from the looks of it. Route file registrar. Yeah, that's cool. I was wondering how it did that. I've not dived this far into the Laravel framework internals, if I'm completely honest. And that is very similar to what I'm doing for loading my routes over here with if we look down here at load routes, I'm using my config loader, but it loads anything that's a PHP array. So we get a new loader and we're just going to load the API routes. And then for each one, we're just going to run through it, register the route, and away we go. And then the middleware itself, or the callables, is going to be, okay, so let's prepare the handlers. Pass through an array of handlers, let the factory handle all of that, but loading config, underneath the hood, the loader is just it's just doing a require as well. So where are we? Patterns, config path. This load. Require. Here we go. I'm requiring there. So sometimes it's easy to forget about some of the more simple parts of the PHP language we could use to solve our problem and try to look for a complicated solution. It's nice to see that Laravel is actually it's validating a lot of the ideas that I've had, which is great. So root registrar file, that's how that is working. We might just need to override this and override the dispatcher at the end of the day, but we might want to do some cleanup. Create root methods, URI action, convert to controller action. If it references a controller, how does that figure that one out? Okay, so if it's not an instance of a closure, then we're basically going to do some magic there. So the way I would do this with an array would fail here. So we're going to have to override certain methods within here already. Convert controller action. We're just turning it into an array in effect. So we could cut to the chase and just use the users. That's a Laravel performance tip. If you don't want your application to chase its tail trying to load your routes, use users instead. That's something I'll remember next time, which is definitely a good thing to remember. If while you might not be having to pass this to there, to that, to there, to that, to there, if you've got, let's say you've got 200 routes registered, that's going to load each time your application loads. It might take 10 milliseconds, but for a route to get through that part of the process in Laravel itself. But if you've got 200 routes being loaded, you're going to have a slower load time. If you've got more, it's going to increase. And I know you can do things like serializing and caching the routes, but best practice, you forget to optimize once and suddenly your requests are taking longer. You can't figure out why. Use users. Great tip. Great tip I just found out for myself as well, so don't feel bad. I've only just learned that myself. So yeah, this is what we're going to want to do. We definitely know we need to override that, and we know we need to override that. So again, let's just come back to our terminal. And let's just add everything within source. So nothing else to add. We are going to commit this, and we are extending Laravel's routing service provider a little. So at this stage, we need to start digging into some of what this does. The controller dispatcher, we definitely know we need to worry about. And the router itself. So at this point, we need to take a step back, I think. We're looking at how things are being bound, how things are being created, but we're not looking at the implementation here. We're not looking at what stuff outside of the framework in our application is dictating parts of these. How are we getting our router? How are we dispatching things in our application, not in the framework? Let's take that step back and look at our actual application itself. So within Bootstrap app, at this point, we are loading in our HTTP kernel. So this is what we need to look at, I believe. This is overriding the root middleware, the middleware groups, middleware itself. So we need to look at this part. So we've got the router as a protected instance. Here is priority, construct, we're getting the router in, sync middleware to router. This method here will middleware priority for each of this middleware groups is key middleware, middleware group, or alias middleware. Go back a step. Then when we're handling this request, which is what we saw back in index.php, I believe. Back in here, we have got the kernel and we're handling a request here, request capture. That is where we are hitting here. We're pulling through that request. We're trying to enable HTTP method parameter override. I don't know what that's doing, so let's have a look. That's interesting. We can have a look at what that's doing under the hood in a little while. Send requests through to router. So we're going to get a instance of the request that's come through. Clear any resolved instances of the request. We're then going to bootstrap the kernel, which is going to this app bootstrap with this bootstrappers, which is load environment variables, load our configuration, handle any exceptions, register facades, register providers, and boot providers. So we know that nothing is actually being booted within our application really until we hit, bam, handle this route. We at this point we've matched things. Yeah, we've matched things. We've got the request. We're clearing everything about the request that could have built up, because I believe it's a singleton, I believe. And then we're bootstrapping everything. We're going, okay, at this stage, this is where we can do some performance improvements when we're doing this bootstrap. This is where all of our cancel that, go forward. This is where we can change how config is loaded, change how, maybe we want to just override this completely and say, actually, we don't want to use facades, where providers are registered and where providers are booted. This bootstrappers, or if we go back one step, this part, this is where we can really be specific about how we want to do it in our application. And that might be something that we do, and that sits and lives within our app. It's not custom code. We can override this now, and we don't have any problems overriding this right now. We can create our own custom kernel if it makes us feel more comfortable, and then this can override it. But the key here is we want to keep it as similar as possible. We might have to look at how middleware is being loaded. That's not the end of the world. So report exception. So this is something that I know I needed to look at. Core hierarchy, kernel handle. Okay, so foundation HTTP kernel. Oh, great. So we can actually really customize parts of this. I've been looking at how I can make this work nicer for a while. So now I know that all I've got to do is in my HTTP kernel, add this method, and then I can control that much nicer, because that's just calling our exception handler. You know, this report exception. This is rendering it. Render, which is taking the request. Let's call them the render method in our handler, in our exception handler here, which extends our handler here. Reflects closures. It's doing lots of cool stuff within there. So there's lots of stuff we can start to understand as we start to dig in that little bit more, instead of just trying to say, actually, I just want to rebuild Laravel because, you know, I don't like this, or people wanting to boycott Laravel because they don't like Taylor, which, you know, there's no need for that. You know, he's given so much to this community. It's great. Yeah, I can't have enough respect for someone who's given so much to the community and not really asked much in return, other than, you know, just don't be mean. So the kernel here, this is where we're going to do most of our work, I believe. I think this, as I suspected earlier on, is where most of our work is going to be. I've been streaming for an hour and 40 minutes now, kind of going through, you know, loads of little parts of Laravel itself. And I think at this stage, we've got everything up on Git. Everything is still working. You can still use this exactly like you would any other Laravel application. It's not going to change much, other than I'm starting to build my own custom part in here, which eventually this will be pulled out into its own package, so I can install it and set it up within any Laravel application. I can turn a Laravel application into an API quickly, instead of spending all that time configuring and tweaking and changing it, or going the opposite route with Lumen, where you spend all that time building it up to be useful. You know, with Laravel, you spend so much time kind of trimming it back so it's not so useful, because you don't need that much in the API. So feel free to have a look at this repo. It is almost 9:30 here in the UK. I'm probably going to call it a day soon. I don't want to dig too much in at this stage. I think I need to spend some time off stream doing some research into how I'm going to override parts of this, because, you know, I appreciate anyone who's turned up, but I don't want to bore you with me digging through how things work, because, you know, you could probably spend your own time doing that, or watch someone who's going to teach you something quicker. So I'm going to call it a day here, and we'll pick this up next time, I think. And by that point, I will have figured out how I can maybe pull in fast route, maybe create our own fast route bridge, and we can start using a different router. That's going to be the main aim next, is how do we replace the router within a Laravel application? And up until this point, we haven't needed to. Going forward, we will have done it. So thank you, and I can't wait to see you next time. Thanks very much.